By the end of this video, you should be able to identify ways the country faced difficult domestic issues in the 1800s. So open to your notes section, take good notes, and as usual, contact me with any questions or any clarification you might need. So this time period in the 1800s was known as the time of reform. To reform is to amend, change, or remove in order to improve form or condition. And in this case, we're going to be examining how the different laws were reformed and how legislation improves society in the United States in the 1800s and early 1900s. I'm going to be reading from the textbook from the following pages. So if you would like to, you can follow along in the textbook, or you can also follow along in the video. If you would like additional information, or you would just like to see the text, you can go to these pages in the U.S. History textbook. The temperance movement. Many social reformers worked to prevent alcohol abuse. They believed that Americans drank too much. In the 1830s, on average, an American consumed 7 gallons of alcohol per year. Countless Americans thought that alcohol abuse caused social problems such as family violence, poverty, and criminal behavior. Americans' worries about the effects of alcohol led to the growth of a temperance movement. This reform effort urged people to use self-discipline to stop drinking hard liquor. Reformers asked people to limit themselves to beer and wine in small amounts. Groups like the American Temperance Society and the American Temperance Union helped to spread this message. Minister Lyman Beecher spoke widely about the evils of alcohol. He claimed that people who drank alcohol were neglecting the education of their families and corrupting their morals. Prison reform. Another target of reform was the prison system. Dorothea Dix was a middle-class reformer who visited prisons throughout Massachusetts beginning in 1841. Dix reported that mentally ill people frequently were jailed with criminals. They were sometimes left in dark cells without clothes or heat and were chained to the walls and beaten. Dix spoke of what she saw to the state legislature. In response, the Massachusetts government built facilities for the mentally ill. Dix's work had a nationwide effect. Eventually, more than 100 state hospitals were built to give mentally ill people professional care. Prisons also held runaway children and orphans. Some had survived only by begging or stealing, and they got the same punishment as adult criminals. Boston Mayor Josiah Quincy asked that young offenders receive different punishments than adults. In the 1820s, several state and local governments founded reform schools for children who had been housed in prisons. There, children lived under strict rules and learned useful skills. Some reformers also tried to end the overcrowding and cruel conditions in prisons. Their efforts led to the creation of houses of correction. These institutions did not use punishment alone to change behavior. They also offered prisoners education. Education in the early 1800s. The availability of education varied widely. New England had the most schools, while the South and West had the fewest. Few teachers were trained. Schoolhouses were small, and students of all ages and levels worked in one room. McGuffey's Readers were the most popular textbooks. William Holmes McGuffey, an educator and minister, put selections from British and American literature in them, as well as reading lessons and instruction in moral and social values. Social background and wealth affected the quality of education. Rich families sent children to private schools or hired tutors. However, poor children had only public schools. Girls could go to school, but parents usually thought that girls needed little education and kept them home. Therefore, few girls learned to read. Common School Movement. Reformers thought that education made children responsible citizens. People in the Common School movement wanted all children taught in a common place, regardless of background. Horace Mann was a leader of this movement. In 1837, Mann became Massachusetts' first Secretary of Education. He convinced the state to double its school budget and raise teachers' salaries. He lengthened the school year and began the first school for teacher training. Mann's success set a standard for education reform throughout the country. Seneca Falls Convention and women's struggle for equal rights. In 1840, Elizabeth Cady Stanton attended the World's Anti-Slavery Convention in London, England, while on her honeymoon. She discovered that, unlike her husband, she was not allowed to participate. All women in attendance had to sit behind a curtain in a separate gallery of the convention hall. William Lloyd Garrison, who had helped found the American Anti-Slavery Society, sat with them in protest. The treatment of women abolitionists at the convention angered Stanton and her new friend Lucretia Mott. Apparently, even many abolitionists did not think that women were equal to men. Stanton and Mott wanted to change this, so they planned to form a society to advance the rights of women. 8 years passed before Stanton and Mott finally announced the Seneca Falls Convention, the first public meeting about women's rights held in the United States. It opened on July 19, 1848, in Seneca Falls, New York. Fighting for the rights of African Americans led many female abolitionists to fight for women's rights. In the mid-1800s, these women found that they had to defend their right to speak in public, particularly when a woman addressed both men and women. For example, members of the press, the clergy, and even some male abolitionists criticized the Grimke sisters. These critics thought that the sisters should not give public speeches. They did not want women to leave their traditional female roles. The Grimkes protested that women had a moral duty to lead the anti-slavery movement. Workers organize. Factories continued to spread in the 1800s. Craftspeople who made goods by hand felt threatened. Factories quickly produced low-priced goods. To compete with factories, shop owners had to hire more workers and pay them less. Shoemaker William Fraser complained about the situation in the mid-1840s. We have to sit on our seats from 12 to 16 hours per day to earn $1. The beginning of trade unions. Facing low wages and the fear of losing their jobs, skilled workers formed trade unions, groups that tried to improve pay and working conditions. Eventually, unskilled factory workers also formed trade unions. Most employers did not want to hire union workers. Employers believed that the higher cost of union employees prevented competition with some manufacturers. Sometimes labor unions staged protests called strikes. Workers on strike refused to work until employers met their demands. Most early strikes were not successful, however. Courts and police usually supported companies not striking union members. Now it's time to find out how well you paid attention and take a video quiz. Answer these questions if you can. Jot them down in your notes. Make sure you have the answers. Number 1, what was the significance of the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848? Number 2, who was the leader of the Common School movement? Which reform movement in the mid-1800s most likely inspired the women's rights movement? What was the name of groups that tried to improve working conditions and pay? What group wanted all children taught in a common place, regardless of background? What state's government built facilities for the mentally ill? What movement urged people to use self discipline to stop drinking hard alcohol? So, once again, review the information in this presentation. Make sure you can answer all of the questions on the video quiz. And if you have any other questions or you need any clarification, please see me.